time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, dig into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Brian Solis, and we're going to be discussing his helpful and empowering book, Life Scale: How to Live a More Creative, Productive, and Happy Life. Brian, it is a great honor. Welcome to the show.
Well, hello, and hopefully it's an honor. If nothing else, I am occupying 30 minutes of your time.
No, that's perfect. And it's still early on this Friday morning. You're only my second video call today, so everybody I'm talking to, it's a great honor. Now, later in the afternoon, I might be more tired, but we're still in that honor stage. I like to begin every conversation by uncovering a bit of the author's origin story. So let's start off with, if I bumped into you on an elevator, I said, "Hey, I'm Shaun. Who are you and what do you do?" What would you share with me during that brief journey?
Would I be wearing a mask or not? This is the question of the new era in which we live.
Might be a little more muffled with the mask on.
Basically, it would sound like this. That's a good question, because recently I've since had a massive career change and have joined Salesforce as their global innovation evangelist. So I haven't actually had this opportunity to. I joined post-COVID, so let's see. What would I say? This is great. I have to practice this anyway. Well, my name is Brian Solis. I am Global Innovation Evangelist at Salesforce, and in addition to that, I'm a digital anthropologist and author and speaker. And I study how technology has changed people mostly, and then how people have then in context changed in markets, as customers, as employees, as teachers and students, as parents and kids, so that I can make sense of the world and help people make decisions towards a better future.
Well, and let's say later I bump into you at a coffee shop and we further this conversation. So in that second conversation...
I didn't do all this homework, Shaun. Come on.
I'm just trying to give people some visual context. They can think through what this might look like. So I might ask you, who are two people that have inspired you most? Could be living, could be dead, but are there any people that have really inspired your life?
I'm going to be super honest with you. I am so bad at this. It's such a simple question. Like, so for example, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite song? What's your favorite color? I fail this test every single time because I don't know that I have an answer to any of these. I suppose it's just based on the moment. So I'm gonna come up with some names that I can think about here. So people that have inspired me the most. My mom has single-handedly built in this discipline that it still keeps me going after all of these years. For a lot of reasons we can get into in another conversation. And then that means I should probably call her today too. And Walt Disney has always been a big inspiration as well. There's a lot, man. I have such a huge list of people that have inspired me for all kinds of different reasons that range from business, personal, to creativity. Man, just all because I don't know. I'm a really complex. Most people are complex, but I don't know. I have to seek inspiration from all kinds of things at all different types of times, because I cannot just do one thing and do that one thing in that moment consistently every single time. It's like this. I have to move earth and sky just to be able to focus and do certain things, because I try to have the biggest impact possible, and then I'm shattered for the rest of the day. But that source of power and inspiration, man, it's got to come from all over the place. But Walt Disney if I could turn my camera around, I would show you that I have an original Mickey Mouse drawing of Walt, and that I use to remind me when I need to be creative.
Well, and I think that's a very fair answer, in the sense that I think all of us have different people that inspire different areas of our life. So your mom, Walt Disney, good answers. And also, don't forget to call your mom later this afternoon.
Yeah.
One more get to know you question before we transition into a conversation related to the book. Are there any books that have inspired or changed you? And I'm thinking, a book that you read every year or that book that you just recommend that to every person you come across?
That one is probably no. I don't. I
Okay.
don't. I have a different book that has to. It really comes back to that complexity. Books are super personal, and time is so rare that I have to. That's an intention based action. So, for example, when I was writing the book before Life Scale, which is called X, when business meets design, uh, I had to read a book by Ralph Steadman, who was the illustrator for Gonzo journalism, because of his crazy wild stories with Hunter S. Thompson, and that I don't know, that was just the right funk and vibe that I needed to get through X, because I was trying to open new parts of creativity that I've never tapped before, and then with Life Scale. It's the same thing. It's I never try to go back and do the same type of thing again. So I try to seek new inspiration to, you know, tap into that rock and roll or whatever it is to plow forward. And with Life Scale, it turned out to be actually no books, uh, but a whole bunch of just videos and conversations and TED talks and uh, things that were consistently around philosophy and spirituality and psychology and biology and neuroscience, uh, because I couldn't find any one source for that. So I know this isn't answering your question directly, but it's the truth.
Perfect. Well, I would rather have the honest truth than steering me in some other direction. So that's just fine. In getting ready for this interview, I was reminded why looking at books is really important. So I listen to tons of audiobooks when I'm out running and commuting and different things. But in this case, I had both the physical book and the audiobook of your book, Life Scale. And I was just kind of really drawn into the interior. Now, I work in the publishing industry, and so I think a lot about books and interiors and design. And I was curious, did you have some direct input into the interior of Life Scale? Because it's a very unique book interior.
If you look at, well, first, Sean, thank you. That's a big part of why those questions that you asked earlier are hard to answer, because I have constantly, if you got to know me at a bar or at a restaurant and we had time to sit down and talk 6 feet apart,
Yes,
uh,
properly socially distanced.
you would see that I have been forced or had to and wanted to, so all of those things combined, reinvent myself every few years. And that's just this is the nature of the industry that I'm in, is that I didn't have the luxury of being me evolved. I've had to control alt delete and learn and do new things every single time. And so my life is if I my age, but it really is a combination of these like 3 to 5 or 3 to 6 year blocks that are all stacked together. So life scale is the continuous evolution, however, of what I was doing, going back to a book called What's the Future of Business, then X the Experience Meets Design, and then Life Scale. And I'll get to Life Scale as quickly as possible, but I want to share the context with you, because this is a huge part of the story, and also a big part of who I am. Uh, when I What's the Future of Business, I think, was my fifth book, and my third solo book. And as a digital anthropologist, I had been looking at ways that the mobile device had been changing how people consume information and how people create information, and what resonates with them, what drives them to share and engage, etc. And I had a working hypothesis that the brain was being changed just by watching these patterns of behaviors evolve in people. And I used the idea of a student, a high school student today, who still has to use a paper textbook in many cases. If they're for the most part digital natives and all they know is digital, the hypothesis was does their brain work linearly the way that mine was taught when I was young? Or did mobile and the iPad, for example, did those devices change the way that their brains are wired to not read, say, linearly, but to learn in a much more dynamic format? So that's where the design starts to come in, because I asked my publisher if they would give me free reign over the design of these books to emulate a mobile app. And so these 3 books, and Life Scale is a little less. I took my foot off the gas a little bit, and I'll get to that real quick. I wireframed these books in the way that you would design, say, like a site. The UX, the UI, I call it an analog app. I wanted to see if you could create a book that was much more like when you open your home screen, for example, X has no table of contents. What's the Future Business has no table of contents. They're all organized by icons. And then each chapter was organized by a series of information. So you don't have to read it left or right. And so that was the idea. If I had to reinvent the textbook for a high school student, what would that look like? And then with Life Scale, because it has to be linear, you're going on a journey. I took those same principles and then upped it, because Life Scale, it tells the story of how technology has rewired us. And it turns out that the hypothesis that goes back 10 years ago, I finally got access to people that then taught me the art and science of what's called persuasive design. So why is Instagram or TikTok or the Facebook like button or all of these apps that we use on a daily basis, why are they so sticky? And it turns out that it's by design. And so there's a bad side to persuasive design, and there's a good side to persuasive design. And so I took those techniques, the positive side of it, to then design Life Scale so that it would promote, even though you still have to go on a linear journey, that it would promote immersion and retention, and hopefully deliver some joy in what becomes complex over time. So it's a long answer to your question. It was me. It was very intentional. I hired all kinds of designers to experiment in this brand new thing of making analog apps.
And I want to also touch on the audiobook briefly. My personal kind of philosophy is that audiobooks read by the author are generally 150% better than audiobooks read by just some narrator off the street. And this was the first audiobook that you actually narrated. So we'd just love to hear briefly about why that was important to you for this book. It felt like it was a real personal thing for you to be able to share this content in audio.
So it's my 8th book. It's the first book that I've read it from cover to cover as an audiobook. I think my first solo book, I read the intro, and that was it. And it's mostly because as a speaker, and this is all pre-COVID, I was on airplanes all the time. And this book, though, it is a personal story, but it was a story it's personal, but it was also inspired to help others that are like me, that were digitally disrupted, and then hit a wall, and that's the only reason why I figured out that there was a problem. And so I felt there was no one else that could read the book. I had to read the book. It's also one of the reasons, this is just some inside baseball, that it took so long for the audiobook to hit the market, was because I couldn't find 2 dedicated days in a row to spend in a studio reading it. But it was a beautiful experience.
Well, this is kind of a random side question about distraction, but it was one of the things I kept thinking about as I was going through the book. In terms of the research you did for the book, the epidemic, the problem of distraction, does that actually run fairly equal across like all age groups and all genders, or is there any one part of society that is more prone to the distraction epidemic right now?
So the answer is that if you live a digital lifestyle, that you become open to distraction. And over time, I mean, this is 10 years in the making, right? This is and research. I wonder. I haven't actually done the homework on this, but I wonder if that hypothesis that we were talking about earlier, in terms of thinking that the brain was being rewired and designing for that. I wonder if there were studies back then around that, because I could tell you that the studies around distraction and the effects of distractions are now just starting to come to light. It's one of the reasons why this book was so hard to write, is there wasn't a lot of research on what actually to do about it. So just to kind of connect the dots, when I was working on that hypothesis, it was driven by research that I had done around how the customer journey had changed, right? So I work a lot in the future business, and what that means is when, let's say if you're buying a car or if you're buying a home or planning your next trip, you go through this journey of how you research, where you go, the devices you use, the information that really connects with you. And I think we could all agree that over the years, it's become really easy to reach for your phone, start a search, go to YouTube, watch some videos, go to Amazon, read reviews, go to social media, ask questions, right? So that has completely changed the customer journey. And why that's important is because at the time, I had called that generation who were making decisions in that way Generation C, where the C stood for connected. And Generation C, why this was such a big deal to businesses is because businesses or any organization, they would look at demographics, age groups, income, education as a means of how they marketed, how they sold, etc. But Generation C was this wild new concept that said there is no age group, there is no brackets of other demographics that we would commonly refer to. If you use a mobile device or a digital device in your life, then you are part of Generation C and you behave similarly anywhere that Generation C exists. And this is global, right? It's actually a reflection of internet culture that changes how we communicate, how we talk, how we think. And then as LifeScale would show, when I finally started to get into the deep research, why that was the case. So essentially, if you use Uber, if you use Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, any of those things, we're all rewiring ourselves for distractions unintentionally.
Well, and obviously making these sorts of shifts and changes that you're recommending in the book, it's going to take some intentionality. One of the things that I think a lot of people will grab onto is the idea of, when we need to do deep work and get into kind of a flow state, this idea of doing things maybe in sprints and intervals. I think that's something people maybe have heard about, they've read about, but a lot of times we just stay with the routine we've had forever and we fail to kind of take that next step of implementing those in our life. So we'd love to have you just comment briefly on the power of sprints and intervals to allow us to get into more focused work.
Yeah, look, I'm going to just set the stage because this is something I've learned since the book is launched. It actually, of all the books that I've published, hasn't performed as well as the others. And here's why. I assumed that people realized that there was a distraction in their life and that they wanted to do something about it. And the book was the answer. Because when I realized I had a problem, it was because I was trying to write another book and I couldn't get past the proposal stage. And as a researcher, someone who writes research reports and constantly writing articles, I noticed that as the years had gone by, that I couldn't get into those flow states that I used to be able to. I couldn't activate them on demand. It had eroded over the years until it just finally all fell apart, and I just kind of threw my hands up in the air. But I didn't know it was distractions at first. I thought it was writer's block. I thought it was just the pressure of having all of these things. And this is an important point to the story because even I didn't realize that it was digital that was causing this. So when I did the research on how to fix it, which took a really long time, there wasn't really much to help you. At the time, it was just get calm, get headspace, practice yoga, meditate, you go for hikes, go to Burning Man. There were all kinds of change your behaviors, do this to change your behaviors, X, Y, and Z. A lot of good stuff out there. A lot of self-help that was really just that would resonate, but nothing would stick. And that's why I realized if I could remarket this book, the way I would say it, and then I'll answer your question, is, it would solve this problem. How do you sell a book to people who are all struggling with distractions and the effects of those distractions that don't know they're distracted, because this is all just normal. So the book resonated originally with people who either heard good things about it, because once you read the book, it's really life-changing, or their problem was so deep that they realized they needed something so advanced, and those people were usually empaths, or high emotional IQ, or incredible creatives that were struggling, but those were all niche groups, not say masses. And so the reason that I share that with you is because the effects of this is going to become a pandemic, pandemic, because now we're all forced to be more digital. We're now spending much more time on our devices because we have to, and most importantly, we're living in a time where the more you binge, and whether that's Netflix or whether that's TikTok, we're also doing it now as a coping mechanism, as an emotional escape to sort of drown out all of the things that are happening in the world. And so we're only multiplying the problem. And so I'm taking us on this path just because it's a little bit of a complex. The answer behind the question is incredibly complex. So now to the intervals. Turns out that to solve this problem and not treat the symptoms like everything else that I had tried to go through, because I did not see myself writing this book. Shaun, I guess one last thing. This book is the result of stitching together what worked, what I found that worked. And in having a conversation with the publisher, I said, I'm ready now to get to this next book that I was trying to write. But I also feel like I should take all of this that I've learned and turn it into a book, because there's got to be other people like me. And so the publisher was willing to take a chance in that direction. To solve the problem, it's very much new, because digital does in fact rewire your brain, and it does in fact rewire your biology and your chemistry internally, just by the nature of how we use it and how we're conditioned to need to use it in order to get the same sort of fixes over time. So in many ways, you're looking at it like a 12-step program, and on one side, because that's the addictive part of it, and on the other side, because we're wired for distractions, you have to then wire yourself in a direction that I realized I didn't want to go back to the way I was, because I don't know that was a great state. I didn't want to abandon technology. I'm a digital anthropologist. I study technology. I work for Salesforce. So I have to embrace technology and this new mindset to wire myself intentionally in a new direction. So that then, in order to do that, to create this new state, this new access to flow, this new access to whatever it is that you want to unlock, the book has to take you through these journeys step by step to help you be ready for the next chapter, because you're literally rewiring yourself as you go page to page, as you go exercise to exercise, because there's no way you can do the exercises that are later in the book unless you train yourself to be ready for that. And I don't think I explicitly say that in the book, but that's actually one of the techniques of persuasive design, is that we're changing behaviors as you go. So, for example, to get to flow state, we go through one exercise was just kind of adopting the Pomodoro technique, which was to focus in 25-minute bursts. And I think I tell the story in the book. So much got cut. It's 106,000 words that got cut down to 50,000 words. And so I sometimes forget what actually made it in there. But the first time that I tried to do the Pomodoro technique, just set the clock for 25 minutes, I think I lasted, I don't think it was even 3 minutes. And reached for a distraction, just mindlessly. It was just motor skills, just casually reached for a distraction, and then that's part of the problem. So that's what we're solving for as you go through these exercises, is to get to that flow state when you can then unlock creativity, where you lose yourself in whatever it is that you're doing. And that's why creativity became part of the book, was that it was not just creating a Mona Lisa, but just the sheer acts of trying to create rather than trying to consume, which is what we've all excuse me, gotten so good at over the years. The acts of trying to create actually help fire different neurons, release different chemicals that put you on this path to be more agile, to learn new techniques, to change and rewire your brain. So I know it's a long answer to the question, but it's such a complex subject.
But a great answer. Thank you for that. If we fast forward to the end of the reader's journey, they've read the book, they've been shifting habits, they're living more intentionally, inspired by their major life purpose. How often should they reevaluate? Things that we set in motion, they often fit with what is going on at the time. But as life shifts, as life changes, we do need to reevaluate from time to time. So how often should we revisit kind of the evaluation part of what you share in the book?
The first year that the book came out, I traveled with it, not because I had to, but because I wanted to keep rereading and keep reminding myself of important things. Because if you choose a life where you're going to continue to immerse yourself in technology, which I have to, you're constantly being pulled in directions that need reminders and constant practice and exercises. So it's really up to you. But I would say at least once a year to go through certain exercises as reminders. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One was, as you go through the journey, you're asked to go through these certain phases and picture, for example, where you want to be, and then turning those visions into actions. And those actions, actually, as you go through them, unlock new dimensions of yourself that you didn't have access to when you did the first exercise. And so essentially you're growing, and your mind is opening, and your heart is opening as you move towards those objects or objectives. So then you see things you couldn't see before. So now you can actually change your next course. So you can actually go through these exercises as much as you want to keep growing, because where you think you want to be today isn't necessarily where you can be. And that's the beauty of a life. The word life scale simply means to choose where you want your life to go and do the things to scale your way towards it every single day. But it turns out that once you go through it, it's such a beautiful experience, such a life-changing experience, that you say like, oh, that's where I wanted to be, but now I want to be this. And then you life scale your way that way. And so I'm constantly going in that direction and using those exercises to go. But this part I want to get to. The other thing that makes it so important that you do this as often as possible, and as possible meaning maybe 6 months, every 6 months or so. Why this is such a big deal? It's not just about distractions. It turns out that as you live a digital life, the persuasive design that's used in things like Instagram and TikTok actually start to push you in new directions and change the values of life itself. And I did not realize that. But in hindsight, as I was doing a lot of this research, I found that in my personal life and professional life, I was making all kinds of decisions from this center of reference that were, in hindsight, I was out of my mind. That I can't even believe some of the decisions that seemed right at the time versus now, because things that shouldn't matter to you start to matter to you over time. And this is a big deal, by the way, for parents or teachers, especially managers and organizations. People are trying to aspire to lives and achievements in life that are all based on the things that don't matter. And I think in the post-COVID world, as we change in this shelter in place, there's people who are going to come out of this saying, wow, my relationship with toilet paper is forever changed, right? This is a somatic marker in our life, an emotional bookmark that's going to just constantly refer us to a new set of values, or you're going to throw yourself so much deeper into digital and those worlds that you wouldn't have time for self-reflection because you were too busy trying to keep up with whatever next challenge was on TikTok. And not that that's bad or anything, but what you don't realize is if you don't give yourself that time for self-reflection, you don't realize that your values changed, and your values are what constitute your decision making and your beliefs and who you are and what you aspire to become and the things that you do as a result. They're what's served up when you have to make easy decisions and really tough decisions. They define where you're going and who you're with and everything. So that's the part that I haven't realized yet what the answer is. When it comes to life scaling towards what you want and what you want to do what you want to do with your life, that part, every 6 months, every 12 months, it's the values part. I haven't really looked back to see if it has been affected yet. But I keep mine, as you see, the book's very visual and asks you to do very visual things, but I keep my stuff constantly at the ready for reference.
Brian, you'd mentioned that, obviously we're recording this at a time when a lot of us are still in lockdown and quarantine as we've been dealing with the coronavirus outbreak or pandemic, whatever you want to call it. But I know a lot of the ways we respond to things is based on how we frame them. And from one of the perspectives I've been trying to look through, or a lens, if you will, is that because of all the pattern disruptions that we're experiencing as individuals and as organizations, there could be sort of a hidden silver lining or golden opportunity to embrace change in a major way because we're in some sense no longer distracted by what our normal life was. Now, we've maybe been distracted by other things as we've been binging Netflix and such lately. But could this be a golden age of opportunity and shift as we kind of rise from the ashes or climb back up out of the valley?
I hope so.
I'm just trying to be optimistic.
I'm a hopeless optimist. Here's why I sort of struggle a little bit with the answer. It comes back to the insight that it was mind blowing, but also completely understandable to me that people weren't flocking to the book because they knew they needed something, that something felt off in their life, and they were just constantly looking for what it was to then find the book that would help them move forward in a new direction. That was my optimism in designing the book and changing two plus 3 years of my life to first go to find the problem and then find the solution. Depending on where you are in the world, it sort of defines how long you've been in lockdown. And if it's long enough for most of us to have changed things for better or for worse. And this is why this is the digital anthropologist in me. I've already seen behavior changes in work, for example, of how people are making decisions in how they shop, how they use technology, because that's my job. I have to already be studying that. I haven't started studying it on what it means emotionally. So if we could take a working hypothesis though, and how I've seen people change already on how they consume and shop and spend money, and that hypothesis is that the average is 66 days to change a behavior to the point where it's automatic, and when it's automatic, it's essentially akin to second nature. So you're not even thinking about it. For some of us, we haven't quite hit 66 days, but I wonder if it's close enough where we have changed in an accelerated fashion and not even realize it. So that means that teachers and parents and managers are going to essentially have to engage in the world in an entirely different way, because you're not going to come out of this and go back to normal. You're not going to start racing back to retail stores and restaurants, because you're going to have in the back of your mind some semblance of concern, because until there's a cure or a vaccine or at least herd immunity, the risks haven't changed pre and post lockdown. It was a matter of doing this in terms of for healthcare providers. So let's play this out in a bit, and this is the futurist in me that essentially scenario plans ahead. This is a big life event for everybody. So like 9/11 for the New Yorkers, right? Not the United States, because even though it's a somatic marker, a life event for us in the United States, if you were there near the Twin Towers, you're going to have an emotional connection to this in a different way than someone like me in California who saw it on the news and was just devastated and still devastated. But this is a global event where we are all experiencing this in our own way. And that, even though we were joking earlier about toilet paper, it's true. You'll never think about wasting toilet paper again or taking it for granted. You will probably always have a stockpile of it in your house, even though I hope we never have to go through something like this again. But it's because it's a somatic marker in our life, that emotional bookmark that connects us to these visceral emotions that are going to sort of remind us in an instant why this is important. So that means, our digital aside, right, what we value. When we come out of this, do we need to spend $3,000 on a handbag anymore, or do we need to think about keeping up with the latest fashion trends? I don't know the answer to that, but what I do know is this: is that you have a choice. As you're watching this, whether or not you read the book, you do have a choice in how you come out and how you live your life. Because if you're not making decisions every single day in an intentional form to move in a direction that you want, then you're not moving in that direction. And this sounds so commonsensical, but it's crazy how much we get caught up in life to not move into a particular direction. And then you have this life-shattering event where people now have an opportunity to force function that series of life changes. Do you want to come back at this and go to the same job? Do you want to come out of this and do the same things that you were doing in life? Do you want to come out of this and surround yourself with the same people that you had in life? Or do you want to think about where you are, where you've always wanted to be, why you haven't gotten there, and start making those moves now? Because this is also a gift. It is a gift of self-reflection. It is a gift to do the things that you haven't been able to do. It's a gift to stop saying, oh, why haven't you done that? Or how have you been? Oh, I've been so busy. Yes, we've all been busy, because that's the design of all of this stuff, right? This is a beautiful moment to reassess where you want to be, who you want to be, and then start doing those things. Because I'll tell you that as I went through this life scale journey, it was such a lonely experience. But the insights that came out of it were so incredible. For example, the same techniques that go into making something addictive and or viral, for example, are the same techniques that make fake news believable, and why it's so easy to completely change someone's mindsets. I always said that there's two ways to change behaviors. One's to manipulate it, the other's to inspire it. I got, after writing Life Scale, and then now, once you go through this exercise, you can't unsee all of the things that are coming at you to change or try to change your behavior. You can't unsee it. In fact, I'm at the point now that anytime I see yet another conspiracy theory or yet another device or another app that is trying to compete for your attention, I get angry about it, because the constant threats of coming at you and trying to take your attention that rob you of allowing you to become who you need to become, allowing you to see who you could become, and then distracting you from doing the things to become that person. It's infuriating, because in the end, and this is where I'll wrap, all of these things have the same thing in common. Apps, devices, information, they all need your attention, because the more attention that they have of yours, the more they can monetize it. And the more they can monetize it, well, then the more that they need to do those things in order to continue that monetization. But the thing about behaviors is that you have to constantly be pushing you and stoking you and prodding you in new ways so that you constantly immerse and immerse and immerse. And none of that is healthy. Netflix's Reed Hastings, who's the CEO, in a shareholder call last year was asked, who's your biggest competition? And he said, sleep. And we're winning. And it seemed like it was a joke, but it's not, right? They all compete for the same thing, whether it's Netflix, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whether it's Fox News, CNN, or radical sites on the left and on the right. Their whole job is to stoke you at the very core of who you are so that they have more of your time and more of your attention because they're monetizing that. That's what infuriates me, is that we don't even see that. We become so enamored with the fact that we have 100,000 followers or we got 3,500 likes on something, or that this news totally confirms what I've always believed my whole life, that we get so emotionally attached to all this stuff, and we were played. That's the thing that just drives me crazy. And we're so moved in any one of these directions that we can't even see that we're not helping ourselves. And so that's how I want to come out of this, and how I want people to come out of this, is to just say, wait a minute, you know what? I am done with not doing those things. I'm done with not getting around to whatever I've promised. I'm done with all of the things that I carry on my shoulders that I feel guilty about every single day because I never got to, or never did, or I never unlocked, or I never achieved those things. Man, we're here. I don't know. I'm on 2 months now. And I'm not coming out the same way, and I hope you don't either. The world needs critical thinking. The world needs empathy. The world needs community. The world needs to think for itself and just use these devices and these platforms for better. Because you know what? This isn't the last pandemic that we're ever going to experience, right? Mother Nature's been showing us states and countries one by one what's happening. If you're Australian, think about this. Before the pandemic, you were locked down because of a wildfire. This is stuff that we have to now start thinking about, taking opportunities to change not just our trajectory, but the gift that I always said, if you went through life scale, give that gift to someone else, because once you see, you can't unsee. And why hold on to that yourself? Get other people. Don't assume that other people feel like they need a solution. That's the problem. They don't. And so what I was asking of everybody who reads Life Scale is become a life scale teacher. I can't do it alone. We have to get people to go on this journey so that they become better, and that everyone becomes more open to seeing the world for what it could be versus the path that the world is on today.
Brian, thank you so much for ending us on a powerful call to action. For the listeners, the viewers who would like to connect with you, find out more about the book, where are some of the places you hang out on the web?
Well, the hub, it would be briansolis.com. And this is not ironic because I now use social much more intentionally. But at Brian Solis on your platform of choice, and reach out. If you have read the book, or if you are reading the book, share your stories with me, because a lot of times we move so quickly, I don't always hear the feedback, but I'd love to hear from you.
And like we do with every episode, we'll have detailed links in the show notes, places where you can connect with Brian and pick up your own copy of the book. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Brian Solis. Once again, our book today was Life Scale, How to Live a More Creative, Productive, and Happy Life. Again, if you'd like to connect with Brian and find out more, a great place to start is his website. You can find that over at briansolis.com. And Brian, I just want to say thanks so much for sharing with us today. You've delivered a ton of value. I so appreciate it. Loved having you on the show.
Thanks, Shaun. Thanks for listening to the book. Thanks for inviting me. This is a great opportunity to not only meet you, but share some things that I don't think I've shared before. So hopefully it helps.